In sport, we obsess over acceleration and top-end speed, but the real game changer might be the ability to slow down. Think about it this way: most non-contact ACL injuries don't happen when athletes are speeding up. In fact, they happen when athletes are trying to stop, change direction, or react in space or to an opponent. And yet, we oftentimes wait months into the rehab process before we introduce or reintroduce deceleration. So what if I told you that integrating deceleration work early, like in the clinic, could reduce injury risk, improve return to play outcomes, and ultimately build better athletes? And today, I'm going to break down exactly how you can apply deceleration early to improve these outcomes and make more resilient athletes. Let's explore. Hey, before we dive in, I just want to say thank you for stopping by. Whether you're listening on the podcast or watching here on YouTube with me, the fact that you're here means the world to me. This stuff doesn't come naturally to me. I'm trying to get better at it. Hopefully you feel like I'm getting better at it. But I really have enjoyed sharing things that I'm learning and things that I'm doing. I've been doing this for 15 years at some pretty fun places, and I'm really enjoying just sharing that stuff with you guys now. So if you're getting anything out of it, it would mean the world if you hit subscribe. But enough about that, let's jump back into the video. Whether you're working with athletes immediately post-op or just trying to bridge the gap from the clinic to performance, or maybe you're a strength coach handling that late stage return to play process. Whichever of those that you are, what we cover today will apply to you. We're going to cover 4 key areas to give you clarity and confidence in how you can apply deceleration training in your rehab process. First, we'll cover why deceleration matters, how it shows up in sport, why it's risky, and why it's undertrained. We'll then move into the injury risk that we're all ignoring, the residual training effects, and what gets lost in the traditional rehab process, and how that potentially can raise re-injury risk. From there, we're going to talk about teaching better mechanics, why the penultimate foot contact is key, and if that word doesn't mean much to you yet, it will by the end of this, and then how athletes trade safety for performance and that balance that we all deal with, and how we can actually support both of those. And then finally, we're going to finish with a very simple and clear framework for you to apply in your rehab, how to safely and progressively train deceleration, when to introduce it, and what exercises you can use. To wrap it up, I'm going to do a full breakdown. We'll do a screen share, and I'll walk you through a figure from a brand new paper that makes this stuff really easy to apply, and it gives you a nice visual to walk you from stage to stage, guiding you in how to implement this with your athletes. So to start, let's talk about why deceleration matters and why it's oftentimes ignored. To begin, we got to start deceleration 101. We got to start with the basics and define what deceleration is. And it's defined as the ability to reduce momentum while controlling force through the hips, knees, and ankles, right? That triple flexion. It's going to involve these high impact braking ground reaction forces, especially when we're talking about change of direction task, right? And so why is this risky? There's a high neuromuscular demand that's associated with these braking impact forces, and this would only increase during fatigue or for underprepared athletes, right? And so because of that, these have been linked to non-contact ACL injuries, unfortunately tendon ruptures, and then chronic overuse or chronic soft tissue overload, right? And so why is it ignored? Well, oftentimes in rehab, the protocols are going to emphasize acceleration, not deceleration, right? And it's just part of, I guess, the rehab culture to kind of wait until end stage return to play to reintroduce some of these higher impact or eccentric tasks or braking forces. And waiting for the end stage of return to play brings us to part number 2, the injury risk that we're not talking about. This is the residual training effect. Strength, power, speed, they all decline rapidly when we're not training, especially that eccentric capability, which is critical for those braking forces. After surgery, athletes oftentimes can go 4 to 6 months without true high force or high velocity work. I mean, up to half a year where they haven't experienced these impact forces or this eccentric loading. And during that time, they're going to lose their strength symmetry or increase asymmetry. They're going to decrease their eccentric capacity. They'll lose their rate of force development, and they also become less resistant to fatigue. And so the result oftentimes is this compensatory movement pattern, right? As they take on fatigue, they're going to move a lot differently. Asymmetrical braking forces have increased, right? They certainly haven't decreased because they haven't been exposed to it. And then increased tissue stress and risk of re-injury as we go to return them to their sport. And this would only put them at an elevated risk of re-injury. Teaching proper mechanics during the penultimate step, during the final step, even maybe steps leading into that deceleration, allow your athlete to set the stage for a safer ultimate stop and change direction, right? We want to decrease the final impact forces at that final foot contact. And then what we want to do is teach our athletes mechanics that allow them to attenuate those braking forces. And that will ultimately lead to improved performance as well. And that's a nice segue to this idea of performance injury conflict. You see, our athletes don't always choose the quote unquote safest movements. They choose the movement patterns that will allow them to compete and win that moment, right? They choose what will help them. And this might include high braking forces with short ground contact times performed with shallower or stiff hip and knee angles done at faster velocities, right? They might choose all of that to win that moment, to get to the loose ball or block a shot. So it's our role as the strength and conditioning coach, as the clinician, a therapist, to educate on mechanics and then build tolerance to some high risk positions, and then ultimately increase both the movement skill and the capacity over time, so that our athletes can win more of those moments without breaking down. So we'll quickly just kind of walk through the framework for breaking down deceleration and introducing deceleration into your rehabs, right? And so the first stage is your post-acute stage. You can see that here, off to the left, represented by the green. In that stage, you're gonna have submaximal eccentrics and some isometrics. Now, the goal within here is to teach positions, control, and patterns, right? We're just kind of reintroducing those movement strategies to our athletes. Then we move into that load intro stage. Now here is where we're gonna increase forces with joint control. We wanna introduce tempos, right? Maybe use some yielding isometrics, build some capacities there. Then we move into reconditioning, kind of stage 3 here. Now we're just kind of building, right? We're gonna add speed and add velocity demands, maybe change the time to that deceleration. Progressing finally to this multi-joint high force stuff that's gonna occur at an extremely high level during this performance stage, the final stage. We're talking game speed, change of direction, deceleration tests with high intentional braking, with the final goal to restore full eccentric capacity and sport-specific deceleration. All right, so we've unpacked a ton, including a simple 4-stage framework you can apply in rehab. Let me give you some key takeaways on the way out. First, deceleration is both a skill and a capacity, and you're gonna wanna train it just like you would acceleration, early and often. The second, start deceleration work earlier in your rehab. Eccentric tasks don't have to and should not wait for that final return to sport stage. You can use submaximal efforts and controlled tempos to build tolerance. You can use holds, isometrics, you have plenty of options there. Teach better mechanics is third, right? We talked about that penultimate step. We talked about the final foot contact. You want to build athletes who are resilient both in strategy and in structure, right? Both of those are critical. And then finally, apply the framework that we went over, right? If you use the framework, then it makes it relatively plug and play to actually walk your athlete through these rehab stages. Now, every athlete is different, every injury is different, so you're gonna wanna pay attention to that individual response and appreciate how they're responding, but this sets the stage for a successful return to play. Hopefully you found this helpful, and if you did, do me a solid, share this with somebody, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button on the way out.